Mira barely slept that night. She sat curled in the farthest corner of her tiny shelter, knees drawn to her chest, listening to the man's shallow breaths. His presence unnerved her. The way his coat had remained dry despite the storm, the unnatural sharpness in his gaze, something about him was wrong. Yet she had saved him. And now she was stuck with him. As dawn crept through the cracks in the wooden planks above, she dared to inch closer. The man was still, his face half buried in shadow. His skin, now deathly pale, had lost any warmth. For a terrifying moment she thought he was dead. Then his eyes snapped open. Mira yelped, scrambling back. The man didn't move. He simply watched her, his dark irises locked onto hers with an unreadable expression. Then ever so slowly he sat up. "You stayed," he murmured. His voice was smooth now, controlled, like the pain from last night had been nothing more than a distant memory. Mira hesitated before answering. "You were bleeding. I couldn't just leave you." The man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. Most people would have. Silence stretched between them. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he peeled away the makeshift bandage. Myra's breath hitched. The wound was gone. Not just scabbed over, not even scarred. It was as if he had never been injured at all. Myra's hands clenched. "What are you?" The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can call me Lorien." That wasn't an answer. Lorien stretched his arms, testing his movement like someone waking from a long sleep. His gaze flicked to Myra's tiny shelter, the damp walls, the threadbare blankets. "You live here?" he asked. Mira swallowed. She didn't like the way he was looking at her, as if studying her, measuring her worth. "Yes," she said cautiously. Lorien hummed in thought. Then, without warning, he stood. Mira flinched. "You've done me a kindness, little one," he said, brushing off his immaculate coat. "I repay my debts." Mira frowned. "I don't need anything." Lorien's smile deepened. "Everyone needs something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, pressing it into her palm before she could protest. Myra's fingers curled around it instinctively. When she opened them, she found a gold coin, intricate and ancient-looking, its surface etched with symbols she didn't recognize. Her breath hitched. She had never held real gold before. "I don't." But when she looked up, Lorien was gone. Mira stared at the gold coin resting in her palm, its surface unnaturally cold despite the warmth of her skin. The strange symbols carved into it seemed to shift in the dim light, almost like they were moving. She blinked, shaking her head. It had to be a trick of her tired mind. Still, unease crawled down her spine. Where had Lorien gone? He had been standing right in front of her only seconds ago. No sound, no footsteps, no trace, just gone as if he had never been there at all. Mira exhaled shakily and tucked the coin into the folds of her tattered dress. She couldn't afford to dwell on strange men who healed overnight and vanished into thin air. There were more pressing matters like surviving the day. The city had no mercy for those who hesitated. With that thought, she left the shelter, stepping onto the damp streets. The morning sun barely reached the narrow alleys, the towering buildings swallowing the light. Mira wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and hurried toward the marketplace. She would trade the coin. Even if it was cursed, even if something about it felt wrong, it was gold, and gold meant food, maybe even a roof over her head for a few nights. But the moment she stepped into the bustling marketplace, a wave of nausea washed over her. The scent of freshly baked bread and roasting meat turned her stomach. Her vision blurred at the edges. Something was watching her. Mira whipped around, but the crowd was normal, shoppers, vendors, beggars. Yet, deep in the tangle of moving bodies, a dark figure stood. Completely still. A tall man in a black coat. Myra's chest tightened. Lorien? No. This man's posture was different, stiff, unnatural. His head tilted slightly as if listening to something she couldn't hear. And then, just like Lorien, he disappeared. Myra's breath came in quick gasps. She shoved through the crowd, heart hammering, her fingers tightening around the coin hidden in her dress. Something was wrong. She needed to get rid of it. Now. She spotted a merchant dealing in rare trinkets and hurried to his stall. The old man behind the counter barely glanced at her. "What do you want, girl?" Mira pulled the coin from her dress and placed it on the wooden surface. "How much can I get for this?" The merchant's disinterest vanished. His gaze locked onto the coin, eyes widening. Slowly he reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the gold, he jerked back, his face twisting in pain. Mira stumbled back as the merchant screamed. The crowd turned. Whispers filled the air. The merchant clutched his hand, his skin burning where he had touched the coin. His eyes, wild with fear, snapped to Mira. Where did you get that? He hissed. Mira took a step back, panic rising. Someone gave it to me. The merchant's face twisted with something between horror and rage. Get out, he spat, shoving the coin back at her. And pray that whatever gave it to you isn't still following you. Myra's blood ran cold. She snatched the coin and ran.